Hey everyone, Eric Watson here, freelance writer, player of games, writer of words, recorder of videos, and tabletop role-playing aficionado. Welcome to another DM's Guild review, my written and video review series where I take a look at the adventures and supplemental material at the Dungeon Masters Guild website. With this video, I'll be reviewing the DM's Guild dungeon adventure, The Dreaded Caves of Ruxabar, designed by Mistfactor Press for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. A review copy has been provided for the purposes of this review. If you enjoy my videos, consider using my affiliate links for your DM's Guild shopping and supporting me via patreon.com/roguewatson. Shout out to my Platinum patrons, Andrew, Brian, Richard, Joe, Will, Tiny Dancer, and Charles, and Gold patrons, RPG Papercrafts, Charming Grenade, Pretty Boy and Yuma, Marcos David Vicente Gilberto, Sean, aka Cert2B, Adam, Dead Lizard Lounge, Alkshi, and Sam. Thank you all very much for your support. Dreaded Tunnels of Ruxabar is a dungeon adventure, and it's just the dungeon, very much just the dungeon crawl, for 5 players of levels 8. It seems like a very challenging adventure. It has a very strong theme with poison and disease. Very light on role-playing and storytelling. This is much more of a, almost like a video game, not to disparage video games too much, but like more of a hack-and-slash dungeon with a lot of interesting environmental challenges. I do like the strong theme. It has some structure and formatting issues. Very, very light on role-playing. Some things it does I disagree with, other things I enjoy. I do like that we got a lot of physical assets with it. We get tokens and a grid map for virtual tabletop, which is always very, very nice to have, so I did like that. But I also had some problems with the physical dungeon design that we will get into in a second. So, The Dreaded Tunnels of Ruxabar. A lot of introduction and backstory, considering that this dungeon is very light on actual role-playing and storytelling in the dungeon itself. The backstory is very nice to have. Essentially, this cult of Jargain wanted to usher in their god. Ruxabar was the leader, the cult leader, and it was infiltrated by a wizard, Inorium, who wanted to bring in his god, I guess, the plague devil, Vinoroth. And they got the cult together to go to this one location in the woods that had a portal, a link between worlds, and it was exploding like the vegetation in the area. It was like super powered, like animals and plants, life, and everything else. And they managed to corrupt that area and turn it into a portal to Maleficto, I think, the plane of poison and disease, I guess. And the ritual, of course, mutated all the cultists, and Inorium was actually able to flee, and the ritual was not complete, is the backstory. So it's only open, like there's just a tear, and that's what's leaking through all of this poison and disease into the area and just corrupting it without necessarily being able to let any actual like creatures or the plague devil himself able to come through the portal. So the players are tasked with going there, and they actually have to complete the ritual, and then they can close it, which is kind of a cool little twist. And they actually get the quest from Inorium, who is now basically a wizard without a spellbook or a staff. All those things were left in the dungeon, which is kind of a neat twist, but it really doesn't end up amounting to anything during the actual dungeon crawl itself. Like, you can see where, like, what I did appreciate is you can see where, like, the cults, slept and where their bathroom was and all these other areas, but there's not a whole lot of role-playing opportunities in the entire dungeon, and it's, even if the players complete everything, then the only interesting thing is that one villain, Inorium, can then flee and become like an ongoing villain for the players in theory. But during the actual dungeon crawl, there's not a whole lot going on for that. But I mean, I appreciate a lot of backstory here. That's good stuff. Multiple adventure hooks are given, but the adventure assumes that Inorium is the quest giver, and they just meet him basically in a nearby town or really anywhere, and he just tells them, hey, this cult came and stole my journal and walking stick, supposed to be his spellbook and his staff, because he's obviously trying to pretend he's a useless old man, which, I mean, players would be able to insight the hell out of anything and be able to tell what's up with that. But he's supposed to be the quest giver, which can be a nice little twist. Otherwise, there's just different ways of getting the players here. They can just stumble upon this dungeon, cave, complex in the woods, or however else. But the flavor text and everything assumes that the players know that they need to like gather the staff in the spellbook. So there's a bit of inconsistency if the players use any other hook other than one or maybe two, which is you don't necessarily meet Enorium, but you at least learn information about what's going on from the nearby town. So there's a little bit of assumption being made there. So the dungeon is a room by room dungeon crawl. It says tunnels, but these are giant caverns. Like, this is a humongous dungeon, not necessarily room wise, and I appreciate that. It's pretty meaty when it comes to the amount of rooms you get here. I think there's 10, 11 total rooms, which is pretty nice. But like, the physical dungeon is humongous. I mean, there's supposed to be, when I picture tunnels, I'm picturing like mine shaft type, tunnels. These are like giant, like huge caverns connected by large hallways. Like, there is plenty of room. There is a table for random encounters, which a lot of it is custom monsters, basically monsters from the monster manual or like Mordenkainen's with extra, like, disease and poison abilities, which is cool because I think that's very thematic. I don't have the tokens set up to show you, but we do get specific tokens that are like they look like disease tokens almost, which is also really neat. Again, only matters if you're actually running it in something like Roll20, but since I do, I find that very nice. This page right here, otherwise, is just spent on the actual disease itself, which is the green filth decay. This is the green gas oozing from basically every single corner of this entire dungeon is leaking forth from the portal that the players have to fight their way down to. And the idea here is there's basically no freaking way you can make it out of this dungeon without becoming diseased at some point. The DC level continues to rise. It's literally like going down into like an irradiated area until you get to the core. It just gets worse and worse. And I would have appreciated maybe a bit more like a compounding effect, because right now like you're supposed. I think the idea is like in the beginning the DC is pretty low, so it's easier to save. But eventually everyone's going to get caught by it. But then once you are affected by it, the main thing is that you just can't regain hit points, which is big. I mean, if you can't heal somebody, that's a huge challenge difference right there. It makes your healer feel pretty shitty. It also kind of works like the Death Curse in Tomb of Annihilation, where the target's hit point maximum decreases, but it's only every 24 hours, and most likely they're not going to long rest in this disease-ridden cave, so I don't think that part matters too much. But it actually stays with the players until you go into an extreme hot or cold environment in order to kill it out of there. And there's even a rule where if the players make it out of here, if they're still diseased, then they're carriers, and that can even be a further thing that can affect the plot in some way. Or it says they can even jump through the portal before they close it to try and just defeat this plague devil and cleanse the entire disease, which is neat. But that's definitely one of those, like, this is part 2 that's not covered in this book. Although it says there's another like sequel coming that involves that, which is really cool. But I'm only reviewing this as it is, so that information is not there. But Green Filth Decay sounds cool. I would have liked to see a little more of a compounding mechanic with, like, if you fail multiple times, then it works like an exhaustion level, basically. Like, you have this suffer, and then this suffer, and this suffer, to where really you feel the effects of being down here with these. I think the irradiated thing is a good metaphor for you just feel like you're just getting weaker and weaker as you go, with the caveat that you have to challenge encounters, assuming players are suffering from at least some levels of this weakness, whereas here the ending is quite the epic battle with a lot of very big scary monsters you saw on the cover, including a bunch of other monsters, so that might make things far too challenging. But otherwise it's a neat concept, but it's just one of those, like, well, the main difficulty is, like, at some point pretty much everybody, because I think the DC ends up going to like 18 or 19 by the end, is going to be affected, because almost everything you do or touch in this dungeon results in you having to roll a Constitution saving throw or become afflicted with this green filth decay that halts your hit point, and even can have a long-term madness if you fail it really badly, and then it's incredibly debilitating. You have disadvantage on basically everything, and as you're just covered in disease. It's real bad. So, interesting environmental challenge, and I'm glad it's level 8 or 9 players, because obviously I don't think you can do this to tier 1 without horrendously crippling them. The dungeon has a lot of flavor text, which I appreciate good flavor text. This is one of those things where, brevity is the soul of wit. It's a little too much. I really like flavor text that's very descriptive and evocative and uses really great language to paint the picture if you don't have a visual aid in front of you, but Maybe it's because the designer also built the map in mind, so the visual elements were already there, but it's almost like this one the flavor text presumes too much of the players. It mentions things like here's how you feel, and here's like you're doing things like you're coughing up stuff, and that you can do that a little bit in some scenes if you want to make more of a cutscene style thing, but it's almost like every single room results in a cutscene of players like taking actions and doing things. You inhale slowly, catching a whiff of the stagnant air, your body reacting with a rough cough. Would that, what about with a big warrior who's got a shit ton of constitution react the same way as a frail, wizard? I think you have to trust your players to react to that. You can paint the picture and say like this: the air is really stagnant and it's hard to breathe, but you don't necessarily say that way your character reacts. So I think it's a very careful, thin line you can walk, and there's some areas that are some flavor text that is especially egregious with how much it tells like what your character is feeling. Let's see. You can't help but multi-toed hands. Squint your eyes. You can't help but look down to the ground. A shiver going through your spine, wondering if what you stand within is similar to that tapestry. That's you shake the thought from your head as your gaze lands upon an object just beyond the tapestry. That's a little too much. That's to me that is if you were playing like an old school text adventure and it was telling you like the things that you felt and everything. And I disagree with that's the method that you should be when writing flavor text for adventures. I think you need to have your players, because your players are also telling the story. Let them react to events and how their players are doing. You can still paint the picture and create descriptive text, but you can't go too far, and I think this one goes too far in too many places. That was a little longer of a rant than I expected, but it was something. It's not really a complaint I've had before either. This one had just really, really long flavor text that just felt a little like it went too far into telling the players how they felt and even how they acted in some stuff. It's almost easier to just go with the map here instead of just scrolling through because it is a room-by-room design. I do like this artwork throughout, though. Very nice. There's a nice little worm scenario later on. I think I can turn on... There we go. So now you're looking at the included map. And here's where you can see that I both like this map and dislike it. And you're like, Eric, you always complain about not having maps you can use for Roll20, and this is a map you can slot into Roll20. What are you complaining about? Well, I like this map. Excuse me while I just sneeze. The problem is it's too big. It's too cavernous. Like, I appreciate the number of rooms. You can squish everything down by 50%, and I think this dungeon is nothing but improved. Because right now you just have vast expanses of empty room. You can't see it because my webcam is covering up the legend right here, but these bigger squares right here are 10 feet, which means the smaller little bitty square right here is a 5 foot. Can you imagine little player of 5 foot tokens in here? Like, this is a vast, vast cavern. And a lot of it is just dead ends. There's nothing down here, there's nothing over here. It's just, you're just wandering around dead space for a while. There's a few noteworthy locations. I also think that the actual floor tile set here does not look good at all. I don't know why we couldn't use like a cave tile set. And then give me, really nitpicky with the map mode, but give me a cave floor and then give me a grid version and a non-grid version. The grid version so I can see how big it's supposed to be, and the non-gridded version so that then I can actually use that map in Roll20 because Roll20's already got its grid. That would be the best case scenario. And plus, shrink the hell out of this map. It does not need to be this big. I mean, there's just giant hallways of nothing but just moving your little tokens around. It's kind of crazy. Like the tunnels of Ruxabar, that makes it sound like it's very small, cramped, interesting tunnels of going into caves and oh shit, there's like big, poison everywhere and how do we get past these spores? But instead it's like humongous areas. So that is my chief complaint. I like the design of the map in terms of the diverse amount of challenges here. So the very first room, you've got a chest on the left side, a chest on the right side. They're both have various environmental hazards. There's a net trap here, and one of the chests is just full of fucking snakes, which is kind of a dick move, but hey, I kind of like it. You can't trust anything. One of them is in like an acid pit you have to get through. There's a whole floor of poison that bubbles up and of course releases gas. This area is just a bunch of infected monsters that stand perfectly still unless someone that's not diseased comes within a certain amount of range, and then they all attack, which is kind of creepy and cool. There's just a lot of neat areas and events here. There's a cabinet full of like jello oozes that can spill out, little cubes, which are adorable and hilarious. Adorious, in fact. As well as you saw the other that stopper with a worm inside that if you open it up for one reason becomes a purple wormling stat block from Storm King's Thunder. Or if a player fucking ingests the worm, then which the designer missed it big time. They should have done the chest burster scene because it says it just kills them instantly unless you save versus basically dying, like a DC 25 con save or something. And you can digest the worm if you make that save and get a stat boost. But otherwise, you just die instantly because the worm like explodes within you. But I think it should have been like a chest burster thing, and you still have to fight him, and then your buddy just dies. I don't know who's ingesting the worm, but there's some player out there who's going to do it. But I liked the actual bit by bit, like room by room encounters. There's a lot of, there's just gas everywhere. The players have to deal with that. You can throw a fireball and destroy it, and that's a method of doing it. There's just a lot of, everything in here is poison. Don't eat or drink anything in the Dreaded Tunnels of Ruxabar, kids. It's not a good idea. And you can find where the cults, that was the kitchen up there. Up here, there's the like barracks chamber down here. Again, you've got that, makes sense where the cult was and all that. So I like the room to room stuff. So the actual dungeon crawl is good. I just have a big problem with this map being way too physically large for no real reason. I mean, there's just huge expanses of room that just you're not doing anything. Like this room 9 right here has a single encounter way the hell up here where it's this diseased hill giant who is actually the last surviving member of the original cult who attacks the players from up here. And you can see like why is this like this could be a third this size and be a lot more meaningful. Right now, what this tells me is that this dungeon vastly favors ranged characters because like you'll be able to see from a long way away and attack everything from range, which is not at all how I would picture a tunnel dungeon working. You'd think you'd be the opposite of that. Had ranged characters be a disadvantage because you're in cramped tunnels. The one cool bit of role-playing involved is if the players realize they can cure this hill giant of the actual disease. Let's go back to here. Because then they can actually talk to that person. They actually don't have a picture here, but it's let's see, where are you? Down here. Bumplegama, the infected hill giant. They can actually either remove curse or lesser restoration or something that they need to have, and they can have her as a potential ally. Like she's still suffering from the disease, but she's not like mad with disease rage anymore. But your players don't really know that. Like if you have a diseased hill giant throwing animal carcasses at you, and the DM says roll for initiative, then you're just like, all right, well, it's like another combat encounter. Like I think as a DM you have to be very much like, hey, this person looks like they're under like the effects of something. I would personally want the players to treat this as a role-playing situation, or at least a challenge in that way, because otherwise this dungeon has like none of that. So I think you need to be more obvious about, hey, you should solve this, via curing them rather than killing them, and you could potentially gain a very powerful, useful ally for the fight to come, which is against this goddamn CR12 Plague Hydra that comes bursting through the portal when you get to the end. In order to actually complete the ritual, you have to find the 3 pieces of Enorium's staff as well as his spellbook. The spellbook is sitting there right next to the portal, and there's a bunch of cultists encased in like poisonous goo that tells you like, okay, well, this is going to be a fight waiting to happen. And you have to collect the pieces of the staff, which basically are all on the way. The only bummer is if they get to the end and they missed one of the pieces, then you have to trek all the way fucking backtrack through this dungeon in order to get one of them. It's pretty obvious that they're all on the main stretches, I think. I think they will have to end up going down here to 8. So if they the only bummer is if they end up going up here and then turning up, then they might miss the one down at 8 and have to just backtrack down, which is a pain in the ass. So unfortunately, that part, I don't know a good way of doing that because I like the fact that you are collecting things in the dungeon and essentially creating like a soft gate for you to make sure that you do different areas of the dungeon before you can open up the final thing. I like that. It's just that backtracking kind of sucks in really any dungeon. And then once you've got the staff, some person with an arcane ability has to actually sit there and concentrate on the spell for the entire round, which also basically neuters your spellcaster pretty badly if they can't use their concentration spell during that entire fight. That's a bummer. and then this CR12 Plague Hydra comes through. Now, I would think that there's plenty of cool disease-focused creatures you could use already. Like, I'm thinking like a Shambling Mound or something like that, and just make that more diseasey, poisony. Whereas a Plague Hydra is like literally just taking a cool creature and make it, alright, well, it's got a poison spray attack or something. That's fine. It just creates a very, very, very difficult boss battle. I mean, a Hydra is already a CR8. This Plague Hydra is a CR12. And as I said, there's already, there was like a custom butcher, this guy, and like his infected dogs, and a bunch of infected cultists, like that room, and Ruxabar the Disease is CR5 Spellcaster. This is a hell of a final battle here. And you have to imagine most of your party is fucking disease-ridden with that green filth decay. So that's very, very challenging. It's one of the things I can't do very well when I'm just looking at something and reviewing it based on what's written is I can't tell if the challenge level. I can make guesses, and this one seems very challenging, but I can't tell how balanced it is. And D&D is really hard to balance anyway. I mean, just it all comes down to the dice rolls. If players fail a lot of saving throws and things, then they're screwed. Whereas if they get a bunch of crits, then it might not be a challenge at all. So who knows? But as written, it seems extremely challenging for a party of level 8 or 9 PCs. And I realize at that level you could be pretty powerful, but still. And it even mentions one of the lines. Oops, that's the epilogue. Is actually a 4. This, isn't it? There is a high chance that the adventurers fail to defeat the infected cult and Plague Hydra. I don't play D&D to kill my players. I don't like that, and I realize maybe that's just me. Maybe some folks like treating D&D like a roguelike adventure, and oh well, those players died. Wasn't that epic? That could be a thing, but not for me. Like I want to create like just another journal entry in their epic campaign. I don't necessarily want to, especially kill my players on an adventure I found in the DM's Guild. If I'm going to kill my players, it's something that, I put together or had planned for a while. So I don't like the fact that this one is written to be exceedingly challenging, that players are likely a high chance that adventurers fail to actually win here. When it was just this, like, old man told them to go close this portal. It wasn't even a big thing, so I'm a bit dissatisfied from that point of view. I do think the players need to be able to win this, but ultimately as the DM you can just tweak things as you could take some of those cultists out or nerf the Hydra, whatever you need to do to change things around. And as I said, it's difficult for me to ascertain exactly how difficult something is going to be, but this one feels very, very difficult. But I liked a lot of the room events. There's some neat stuff here. The actual theme is extremely, extremely strong. Every single object and encounter and monster is dripping with poison and disease, so that part is very, very well realized. And there's a lot of fun events and things to be found in here, with including a loincloth of nourishment. I don't know what the hell that's all about. So let's go over my pros and cons. Carefully scroll up. Pros and cons for the Dreaded Tunnels of Ruxabar. So pro, it is a detailed dungeon with a strong theme. As I mentioned, everything is full of disease and poison. All the monsters are that way. All the environmental challenges are that way. A lot there, and that kind of bleeds into my second pro, which is there are interesting environmental hazards and challenges. It's not all just monsters. It's a lot of cool traps. There's gas spores everywhere. There's that net trap that comes down. There's the jello cubes that can attack. There's like a tree with poisonous apples, which don't fucking eat the poisonous apples if you're in a poison dungeon. It's not just a bunch of poison monsters. In other words, there's actual like environmental challenges that have no monsters whatsoever, which I do like that. That's something that I wish dungeons did a lot more of, and this one I think does that very well. And then pro, the player maps and tokens provided for virtual tabletops. I didn't show the tokens yet, but they're very, very nice. They're using all the, obviously, artwork from this PDF. And then the map itself, well, we'll get into that in the cons, but I like the fact that we got a map, and I like the layout and design of the dungeon. It's just too big, which goes into my first con. The dungeon is unnecessarily huge in almost every area. I don't know why. One of the first things I would do, which unfortunately I'd have to redo that map to do this, would be to condense that map and make everything smaller and tighter and more focused and create actual tunnels rather than giant freaking caverns. It kills the flavor, I think, and makes it so if you're using a VTT, which that map is designed for, then you're literally just moving small tokens around this giant cavern of darkness with nothing there, and it makes everything feel a lot less compact and detailed than it is. Like, there's a lot of good stuff in here, and every room has something interesting, but the way it's done, you have vast expanses of nothing, so it makes the dungeon feel a lot emptier than it is. Con, it's very light on role-playing and storytelling. Even the initial player hook, adventure hook, is pretty much the only first story hook, the only adventure role-playing thing that you have. After that, it's just pure dungeon crawl, and then during the dungeon, you can basically have no role-playing whatsoever, especially if you don't cure that giant character and free her from the disease. Then it's just all combat encounters and all environmental hazards and traps. There's going to be no actual like role-playing with any NPCs whatsoever, except for that very beginning where that villain in disguise gives you the actual quest. So that's just know what you're getting into this one, and I don't like that there wasn't enough of role-playing. There either need to be more environmental storytelling, or at least like one or more NPCs the players can interact with, or maybe Enorium shows up at the end. Maybe he's been following the players, and then he shows up and tries to steal back his staff and spellbook. That would have at least made the climax more interesting, and if you're going to wait, push everything, all the role-playing stuff to the end and have him do this big villain speech, that would have been really satisfying, so that's kind of what I'm talking about. And then the final con, there's just too much flavor text that presumes PC's actions and emotional responses. As I mentioned in my rant towards the beginning of this review, it goes a little too far in the direction of basically writing as with novel prose and talking about like, here's how you feel and here's how you react, and that goes a step too far in describing what should have been just descriptive text on the environment. And let your players like join in on how they react to these situations. Final verdict: the Dreaded Tunnels of Ruxabar takes PCs through a challenging, disease-ridden dungeon crawl that's as much about surviving the environment as the denizens within. Thank you for watching this video review. You can see my written review at roguewatson.com. You can support my work at patreon.com/roguewatson, and you can follow our own D&D adventures here on my YouTube channel. Thank you.